Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are back again in the Alshech Academy here in Tzfat, where we do the weekly portion in the holy book TORAH Moshe of Moshe Alshech. And we are in Parshat Beshalach, where today Moshe will take us through the entire episode of the journey of the Jews out of Egypt and then heading towards the Yam Suf and the Paro's decision to pursue them, and all of the lines in between. So Bezrat Hashem Naseh Natzliach may be merit to connect to the soul of the holy Moshe Alshech and learn the Torah that he's teaching us. So the pasuk starts off, Vayhi Beshalach Paro et ha'am. It was when Paro saw off the Jewish people, V'lo nacham Elohim, and Hashem didn't lead them, Derech Eretz Pelishtim, through the land of Pelishtim, Ki karovhu, because Pelishtim is close, Ki amar Elohim, because God said, Pen yilachem ha'am, may the people reconsider, Mirotam milchama, when they see a war, V'shavu Mitzrayim, and they'll return to Egypt. So the questions Moshe is going to take us through are as follows. Ra'ui lasim lev, we need to pay attention to the word Vayehi. As we know, Vayehi always means a lashon of tsar, it's expressing sorrow. And the Midrash, actually, the beginning of the parasha says, Mi amar vai. Vayehi is like vai. Oy vai. Who said vai? So we have to understand what is this exclamation of sadness and exclamation of sorrow that is being expressed with the Vayehi. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. Number 2, Omro et ha'am. We see a different word, different description describing the Jewish people from the beginning of the parasha to later on, where it says, in the beginning, Vayi Beshalach Paro et ha'am, Paro sent the Am, the nation, and later on it says Bnei Yisrael. So why do we have a change of description of the phrase of how we're referring to the Jews? One place Ha'am and the other place Bnei Yisrael. Number 3, Amrav V'lo nacham. The pasuk says, Vayhi Beshalach Paro et ha'am. It was when Paro sent the Jewish people. And it doesn't say anything to describe what happened then. It just says it was then. And then it says, V'lo nacham Elokim. Another thing that happened was that Hashem didn't lead them. So the fact that there's a vav there, it seems to be saying another statement, besides what it was already introduced with the first line, which was Vayi Beshalach Paro et ha'am. But that's obviously seemingly you can't say that because he didn't say anything. So the simple understanding would be that when Paro sent the people out of Mitzrayim, Hashem didn't lead them through Pelishtim. But then we have to understand why it says V'lo nacham, which seems to describe a new piece of information being given over. And another question is, Amro, number 4, Vayasev. Vayasev, Hashem led them in a roundabout way. Lama yode'eni me'ata she'esibam le'yam suf. Ki zot hayta kavana shelo nacham Elokim derech eretz Pelishtim. Right, so it says, besides the fact, this is already going into the next pasuk. So the pasuk says, why did we not go through the Pelishtim? Because of the fact that a war might break out, and the Jews will feel too close to Mitzrayim, and they'll just head back. And the next pasuk starts off, Vayasev Elokim. Where did God take the Jewish people? Through the desert to the Yam Suf. So this seems to be another reason that the Jewish people didn't go through Pelishtim, because Hashem wanted to take them to the Yam Suf. As we're going to see, the majority of this week's parasha talks about the events that transpired at the Yam Suf. So, says Ramosha, why doesn't the Torah say V'gam? Another reason, an additional reason why he didn't take us through Pelishtim is because he wants to go to the Yam Suf. But it seems that the Torah is not referring to it as a second reason, and at the same time it's referring to it as another reason, so we have to understand what is this additional piece of information telling us. Number 5, Amrov Chamushim Alu Bnei Yisrael, the Jews left Egypt with weapons. Now the question is, why does the Torah tell us here? How is this relevant to the fact that it's they've left Egypt? And another thing, really the question, I'm assuming this is really what Moshe means by this question, is why does the Torah mention the fact that they carried weapons now? Why doesn't it mention it earlier on when it actually describes them leaving? In last week's Parshat, it describes the Jewish people leaving with all of their hosts of people, of animals, of children. Why is this specifically introduced here when we're describing the events leading up to the splitting of the sea? Number 6 says Moshe, Amro she'im hayu rakeh halivav. If the Torah is referring to the Jewish people as soft and fearful people with no braveness, that they would just return to Egypt at the first sight of war, then why does it say that they left with weapons? People carrying weapons seems to be that they're ready for a fight, not that they're just gonna run away and head back to their slavery in Egypt. V'gam, says Ramosha, we know there's another explanation from the Midrash what the word chamushim means. And the Midrash says that chamushim means that only a fifth of the people left, or only a 50th. And as we know, the Midrash even adds another ratio, only 1 in 500. So it's either 20%, 2%, or 0.2% of the people that left. So now Ramosh is asking us the same question here. Why is this information mentioned here specifically regarding these events, describing what led up to the chase of Paro up to the Yam Suf? Lama yodi'enu po tzeitam echad nechamishim or chad nechamisha. Why is the Torah choosing to say this here in this word v'chamushim? Ki im b'makom shesipur ha'yetziah haya ra'ui. It should have been, this information should have been relayed to us earlier on, Parshat Boel Paro, which is the earlier Parsha last week, where we describe the Jews leaving Egypt. The Shehu Po Biltim B'Kushar, it seems out of place here, out of context, to be mentioned here. It seems to be like a random bit of information that isn't helping the narrative of the general narrative of the story. Number 7, Amro vayikach Moshe. And the pasuk describes Moshe as the one carrying the bones of Joseph. Ki en mekomo po, says another question. Why is that mentioned here? This is another thing that should have been mentioned when the Jews left Egypt. Ki im lamala. The Parsha HaKodemet, they should have mentioned the previous Parsha, Ba'askir Nasiya b'Mitzrayim. V'lo po, ashu achar yotam b'Sukkot. This is already a few days into the journey. They're already in Sukkot, in the middle of the desert. Uma gam, says Ramosha, I've got a perfect place where we can throw it in, and it will have very relevant positioning there. According to the Midrash, and it's also a Gemara in Sota, where it says that the Shekol Yisrael hayu asukim bekesef v'zahav. The entire Jewish nation were busy loading themselves up with gold and silver from their neighbors. Moshe ba'atzmot Yosef. Moshe wasn't interested in all of the riches. He instead was carrying out the mitzvah of sorting out Yosef's bones. And the pasuk in Mishlei that says, Chacham lev yikach mitzvot, those who have a wise heart take mitzvot, choose mitzvot over other things, is given to Moshe to refer to Moshe at that time. So it says Moshe Alshech, Im kem ba'omrova yishalu b'Mitzrayim. If, according to the Midrash, according to the Gemara, that was the time that Moshe actually put the effort in and busied himself with the task of taking Yosef out of Mitzrayim, then it should have been mentioned while the Torah describes the rest of the Jewish people asking for all the gold and silver and garments. And there it should have said, Hayal Lomar, Moshe lakach et atzmot Yosef. Moshe, on the other hand, was the one taking the bones of Joseph. So we have two bits of information that we want to understand how that's going to help us understand the narrative here, even though they seem to be related to the actual Exodus per se, not really to the events leading up to the splitting of the sea. And Rav Moshe is going to tell us how they explain the narrative here. Number 8, Amro imo shehu miyutar. It says Moshe took the bones of Joseph, imo, with him. What does that mean, with him? He took it. This is actually where we learn a very interesting halakha. that a dead body is allowed to be in the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount has its holiness equivalent to the Levite camp in the Mishkan. And we learn from here that Moshe carried Joseph's body and bones with him in his camp, which is called the Levite, right? There's the camp of the Mishkan, the Machne Kedusha. Then there's the Machne Leviah, which is equivalent to the Temple Mount. And then there's the Machne Yisrael, which was the general Jewish population, which is equivalent to Jerusalem, around the Temple Mount. So this is actually a very interesting word that the rabbis use to learn this halakha from. But Rav Moshe is telling us that we see from here that this word needs explaining, why we're specifically talking about Moshe taking it close to him and with him. Another question Rav Moshe says is, why did, when we describe the oath, the serious oath that Yosef gave his brothers and his children and nephews when he died, he said, Hashbeah Hishbiah. He promised them. He made them really a double oath. And as we know, the word for pakod yifkod is a double use of the word remembrance, that God is going to remember us. So what is this double use of the oath and the remembrance? Number 10 asks Rav Moshe, Amro pakod yifkod, v'haya dai yomar ki hashbeah hishbiah et bnei Yisrael lahalot etzvotav mizeh. So obviously when Yosef told the Jewish people that they should take his bones up, he mentioned in his statement, pakod yifkod, one day God will remember you in exile and he'll take you out. And then when he takes you out, when he's pakod yifkod you, take my bones with. But that isn't relevant for us right now, because right now we are in the time that we're being redeemed. So all we need to reference when we describe Moshe taking the bones is saying, why did Moshe take Yosef's bones? Because Yosef made the Jewish people swear solemnly that they're going to take his bones out. Why do we need to mention the pakod yifkod aspect, which was relevant up until the Exodus, and now post-Exodus it seems to be irrelevant to the story of Moshe taking the bones. V'gam omro leimor. It says, Hashbeah Hishbiah, he made them promise, leimor, saying the following. And as Rav Moshe, we know Rav Moshe always asks what leimor means in every context. Usually leimor, we know, means to say to others. What was here, what were they saying over? It seems to be, this is the statement Yosef said to them, and that was it. So those are the 10 questions of today's parasha so far. And we're going to go into it Bezrat Hashem. So now we need to understand the famous question, which really is the question of why did the Jewish people leave Egypt out of this long roundabout way? It's literally, it won't even be one of the routes and ways. You know, when you put in Google Maps, you want to go somewhere, there'll be like 3 different routes. You know, no tolls, yes tolls, other road. This wouldn't even be one of the 4 options because it's such a roundabout way. So what we need to really understand, what was the benefit of this journey? So Rav Moshe says as follows: Omnam hinei b'tchilat sipurei hamasaot. Before we begin the entire story of the Jewish people in the desert, achar yotam Sukkot, once they've arrived to the first stop, which is Sukkot, Terem yedaber b'kol hadvarim shenitgarshu sham, before we go into all the details and the stories that transpired in the desert, ba v'silek m'levav enosh asher yuchal laharer ma she'eino kvodo yitbarach. So, meaning, if somebody sees from the outside, watching the events unfold, and sees that the Jewish people are being taken by Hashem on this roundabout journey, they might begin to have negative thoughts or non-respectful thoughts towards Hashem, disrespectful thoughts towards the way Hashem is treating the Jewish people. And he'll say as follows: what would be the thoughts that one might have? One might think, as we're going to see in the next 3 or 4 books of the Torah, all of the events that happened in the desert, because they didn't go through the simple way, which would have been a no-brainer to just go straight up north to Israel. And because they took this entire long journey, mitza'um ra'ot rabot, they had very long, difficult years in the desert. Eventually this led to them being kept in the desert for 40 long years. One might have been filled with bitterness and complaint towards Hashem and say, Tachat me asa Hashem kacha. For what reason? Why on earth would Hashem do this? You have a nation that has been enslaved for many years, and finally you're taking them out, and you're going to give them a land that you promised them. Just take them in. What's the point of going through all of this further suffering, which eventually turns into a complete nightmare? Instead of taking them through the quick way, just a few days would pass for him, they would already be in the Holy Land. One might come up with three different theories of why the Jewish people had to take this long way. Number one, says Rav Moshe, the first theory might be as follows. Why did Hashem do this? That the Jews should not be looking like a thief that is escaping the crime scene that he's running away from. Once if the Egyptians and Paro will see that they're heading straight to another civilization, the closest nearby country, which is the land of Pelishtim, or the land of Israel through the land of Pelishtim, they would see miyad yakiru ki lo yashuvu od. This would be an instant giveaway that their promise that they're going to come back after a 3-day journey in the desert was a hoax, and they never really meant it. So why does Hashem have to take us through the desert? Because we have to put up a front to keep Paro guessing of where we're heading and whether we plan to come back. In order to keep him on his toes, to keep him believing that we're still true to our promise, that we said that we're going to travel 3 days into the desert and do a slaughtering party. So therefore, we didn't want Paro to actually get wind of the fact that we're not planning to come back, and that would be a reason to head into the desert, not straight up north to Eretz Israel. That's number one. Number two, this would be a similar reason, but here we're not referring to Paro trying to get his slaves back, but rather Machmat HaMitzriyim Shehish Ilum. We know that the Egyptians lent the Jews all of their expensive vessels and fancy clothes. If they will see the Jews heading straight up to Israel, they will instantly run after them to get their items back. Mitzarat libam. Ish al klei kaspo v'zahavo. Everybody wants his jewelry back. They want their nice gold and silver goblets and bowls, and their finest fancy dresses. Umachmadem atovim. They won't wait too long to see the Jews getting far away. The second they get the idea that the original claim of taking 3 days out in the desert is not happening, they will instantly take chase to get their stuff back. So this is similar to the first reason. Both the Mitzrim and Paro will chase them. Number three, a third reason might be why Hashem takes them to the desert. It's not because of the desert, it's because Hashem wants to take the Egyptians, lead them where? Lead them to the Yam Suf. Why was it important for Hashem to lead the Egyptians into a trap, to throw them into the Red Sea? This was in order to take revenge on the fact that the Egyptians threw the babies into the river. And as we know, Hashem always exacts punishment, midah keneged midah, the way Hashem gives a like for like punishment. So this would be a third theory why Hashem had to, so to speak, take the Jews into the desert towards the Red Sea, so that he can punish Mitzrayim there. Says Rav Moshe, if these are the real reasons, that the Jews took the desert journey. Halo hayta tlunat Yisrael al Hashem chalila. This would be a cause for the Jewish people to really have bitter claims and complaints against Hashem. But Omram ki al tova mu'etet, for this relatively small gain, hevi aleim ra'a gdola. The Jews don't really care that much if the Egyptians get their punishment by being drowned in the sea. Okay, I can live with the fact that the Egyptians didn't all die and get drowned in the Yam Suf. And what else? I can also don't mind that you don't get that they'll come and take back their gold and silver. I'll be fine without it. The main thing is the main thing is that they don't die. Eventually, all these people died. Staying in the desert for 40 years before they can go into the land. So now we're saying what reason is still valid, somewhat, is the reason that Paro, because he was originally told the Jews are going to leave only 3 days, and now he's going to see that they're heading straight to civilization, not to the desert, he'll run after them. But now the Jews are going to have an even deeper complaint. They're going to ask, why on earth did you tell him 3 days to begin with? This is like a very strong question, really, that anybody can have on this entire story, right? As Ramosha says as follows: Lama amarta derech shloshet yamim sheyachshavu shenashuv. Why do you have to fool them into thinking that we're going to come back? She'ali they came, which now caused us halachnu me'ra'al ra'al arba'im shana babel, which caused us to have to go to the desert for 40 years. Hashem didn't have an issue to take them out of Egypt without fooling Paro. He didn't have to fool them. Right? Because we know Hashem ultimately took them out with great wonders and plagues. And Paro eventually had to submit to Hashem's will. That was regardless if there was only 3 days or not. So now the Jews were questioning the entire method, the entire approach of why we're now going to be relegated to be 40 years in the Midbar and die, and only our children will go in 40 years, all because of this stupid plan of trying to fool Paro. So Al-Ken says, Ramoshe, that's why these psukim here now are going to come and tell us not to be fooled. Not to think that these 3 reasons are the real reason why the Jewish people didn't go straight into Israel. To remove anybody's mistaken thoughts against Hashem's ways. Beshalach, which is why we're going to start the pasuk to describe and explain the itinerary and the path the Jews took out of Egypt. So now Rav Moshe is explaining, what does it mean Vayehi? Vayehi means suffering, sorrow. Who was suffering? The Jews. The Jews went a long roundabout way, which eventually caused them a lot of suffering. Why is that so, says Hashem? It's not because of me. Eino mitzidi chalila, ki imitzad Paro. It's all coming because of Paro. Ki vayehi Beshalach, vay haya Beshalach Paro, sheshilcham biyado mituv retzono. Paro actually sent the Jews with his entire heart at the time, because after all the plagues broke him down, and the last plague of the firstborns dying, Paro actually broke down and he actually sent the Jews out. Not only that, says the Midrash this week, that he also actually accompanied the Jews out. He actually gave them a royal accompaniment out of Egypt, and he just didn't let them just go on their own. So that is one thing that caused the suffering. We're going to see how this ties in. And Shenit, another reason that of the suffering of the Jewish people is something to do with what? Beshalach Paro. Number one is the fact that Paro sent us out on his own will, and he even accompanied us out. And the second reason is Et Ha'am. Beshalach Paro Et Ha'am. What's the Am? The Zohar tells us every time it says Et Ha'am, and in the same discussion, it uses a different way of describing the Jewish people, Bnei Yisrael, then we know that when it says Ha'am, it's referring to the Erev Rav. They were the low part of the nation. You could say the simple, the basic people, just the Am people. They weren't the Bnei Yisrael, the elevated, lofty people. So he says Moshe, Kizeh klal gadol nilmad michachmei haemet. This is something we learn from the secret, the Kabbalah. Shekol makom sheneimar Am. If it says Am in the Torah, ube'inyan atzmo omer Yisrael, and in the same discussion later on, it refers to the people as Yisrael. Says the Zohar, you should know she'elu erev rav ve'elu Yisrael. The Am is the Erev Rav, and the Bnei Yisrael is the real Jewish people. So now we know that why it starts off with Ha'am, because we're talking about the reason why the Jewish people had to go through this long roundabout way. Because we have the Am, because we have the Erev Rav. What does this have to do with anything? It says Ramoshe umimash shalach Erev Rav velo ikvam, because Paro sent the Erev Rav with them, and he let them leave. Ba'a al Yisrael ra'a gdola. This caused the Jews a very bad thing. Why? Because the Erev Rav is with them, now they're going to see a war. If they wouldn't have waited 40 years, it's not because of the reasons we mentioned earlier, that the Egyptians will run after them and try to get them back to be slaves, try to get the items back. Hashem said, the Am will reconsider. Who's the Am? The Erev Rav. The Am will reconsider when they see a war. Because the Erev Rav have a weak level of emunah, because they aren't real Jews. He milchemet Plishtim. As we know that the Plishtim were very strong nemesis of the Jewish people, and this was going to happen. This is something that actually happened. The Gemara in Sanhedrin brings that 30 years prior to the Exodus, what part of the Shevet of Ephraim went to Israel before the Moshe Rabbeinu came, and they all got slaughtered. So this was like news that the Jewish people are not scared of the Palestinian threat of the Plishtim. So because of this, because the fact that we're scared that the Erev Rav are going to be afraid of the Plishtim, we're not scared that the Jews are going to be afraid. Why? Because the Jews have emunah. The Jews know that Hashem is going to take care of them. But the Erev Rav are going to be scared of any war that the children of Ephraim, just like the children of Ephraim, fell in battle, all of them, to the Palestinians. Now the Jews are scared. Now the Jews have to take the whole roundabout way because the Erev Rav is with them. If it would have been just the Jews, then the Jewish people wouldn't have had to go this long way. So now we have two reasons why the Jews had to take the long way. V'gam v'havai ha'acher hu sheshulchan paro ba'atzmo. Now the fact is that the Jews were sent away by Paro, and he accompanied them and led them out willingly. So now v'shavu Mitzrayim. Now they can return back to Egypt, because if the Jews had have left Egypt against Paro's will, then they wouldn't really feel welcome to go back to Egypt. Egypt wouldn't be an automatic option of where to run to, because they wouldn't be welcome there. There'd be arrest warrants out on them. But because Vayhi Beshalach Paro et ha'am, because Paro sent the Jews out willingly, so now when they see a war, they can go back and feel that Paro is going to welcome them. If Paro hadn't sent them away and they would have escaped, they would be scared to run back there. Lest they be punished for the fact that they escaped. If your master actually let you go and he accompanied you out on your journey, he'll feel welcome to come back. When Paro let them go, because they didn't leave against his will, he eventually conceded to Hashem's will, or to begrudgingly. Oh, the Rabbateinu Shamrusha Paro Ayam Elaveh otam baderech. Not only did he let them go and he submitted, he actually led them out and went with them. Umarel em chibaya teira. He showed them extra fondness and love when he let them go. So now lo haya pachad sheyeshuv Mitzrayim. The Jewish people always have Mitzrayim as a option to go back to. Ki morat halei al rasham pen yamisa v'darabam od alehem. If Paro wouldn't have let them out with such happiness and with the full consent, they wouldn't want to run back to Mitzrayim because they're scared of getting punished. They'll be given even more extreme work. But he'll never be able to go back. Right? It's like, I guess, if somebody escaped, Second World War Europe, there's no fear that he's going to run back there. Nobody's going back. But if somebody escaped America to come to Israel, if things get difficult here, financially or whatever, he misses the good old days in America, then chances are, he feels welcome back there. He'll just settle back into America. So the fact that the Jews didn't escape Egypt, they left, and essentially they were still welcome back, is another reason why the Jewish people, or really the Erev Rav, couldn't be taken on the fast route. So you thought, originally we presented another theory, a third reason of why we have to go through the Yam Suf and not Pelishtim, because we want to punish the Mitzrayim like for like and throw them all into the water, just like they did with the Jewish babies. Hashem could take the Jewish people where? Through the what? Through the Yam Suf. She'im lo ken. Why does he have to take them through the Yam Suf? There's another ocean he could take them, another sea, the Mediterranean Sea. There's a lot of beaches along the Palestinian coastline. B'yam Pelishtim sheb'ma'arav she'Mitzrayim v'derech eretz Pelishtim. Ki difnei hayamim olchim Canada, as it's known to be a beach area. Ki shnei yamim hem. There's two beaches, there's two seas next to Egypt. There's the Red Sea and there's the Mediterranean Sea. Echad lemizracha hu Yam Suf, echad lemarava hu Yam Pelishtim. V'zeh amro v'yasev Elokim. So Hashem took the Jews around the Yam Suf, that meaning Hashem doesn't want to take them into the sea just to kill them. That's not the main reason, because he could have taken them, if the main reason he took them through the Yam Suf was just to punish them through water, he could have taken them through Pelishtim and punished them with the Mediterranean. So therefore this is not the reason. What is the reason? The Erev Rav are the ones who are going to be afraid. They're the ones that are going to run back because they don't have emunah. They don't trust that Hashem's got it figured out. How do we know that it's only the Erev Rav who are weak and scared of any facing war? Because the Jewish people have weapons. The Jewish people are packing all kinds of different war arsenal. And therefore, if they were considering just backing out of any challenge and heading back home. They wouldn't come with war. They couldn't come with weapons, ready for a fight, ready to take on any challenge. They wouldn't have lots of weapons. The fear is only on the Am, the Erev Rav. Law al Bnei Israel, not referring to the real Jewish people. Now we're going to go also to reference the Midrash. The Midrash says, what does Chamushim mean? Only 20% or 2%, etc., or even 0.2% left. What does that have to do with the narrative here? Because even from the Jews, not all the Jews really had this level of emunah. Even the Jews themselves, 80% or even 98% of the Jews wouldn't have had this level of emunah, because it takes a lot of faith to head out into the unknown, being a slave people, and being ready to take on great nations and real battle scenarios with no prior training. But the Jewish people had emunah. How do I know? How does it make sense that an entire nation of people have emunah? Because you should know this is not the entire nation. This is only 20%. It's the cream of the crop of the Jewish people. The other 80% that weren't ready to face any challenge in the desert didn't want to leave, because they knew that the wars could happen, but they weren't ready to believe in Hashem and take on the world with Hashem's backing. So those people that weren't ready to become supernatural and to do the unimaginable, they actually perished in Choshech. Hashem said, you know what, if you're not ready, then you're not ready. That's it. I'm not going to force you to be ready. And that's why the pasuk is, again, the Rabbi Moshe explains, V'chamushim ala b'nai Yisrael, these are two reasons in the same word, referring to the fact that the entire issue here was the Am, the Erev Rav. They were the problem. But the Am Yisrael, they came with weapons because they have no fear. Because we're only talking about the top 20%, 2% of the people. And they were filtered out from the rest of the people who had weaker faith or no faith. The entire fear of going back in the face of war was only the Erev Rav, Hakatanei Emunah, who have limited faith. They came out with only 10%, 20%, only 2%. They're the real strong Emunah. If it was only 2%, if it's 20% of the Jewish people, you could say 20% are people that have, their emunah, they have levels of emunah. But if it's only 2%, then these 2% of the entire people, we're talking about really, really the cream of the crop, like the proper people that have high levels of emunah. And that's why they won't go back. So this is an interesting pshat for Rav Moshe. It's not the pshat, I would say. It's not the pshat in the pasuk. It's as we know, Rav Moshe is a drush, because simply speaking, we see in the psukim that the Jewish people didn't have so much emunah, and it says Vayaminu b'Hashem u'Moshe avdo. At the Yam Suf, the Jewish people received more emunah, and we know also that the man was really an emunah booster. And as we know, today is Tuesday, Parshat Beshalach, which is the school day Parshat Laman, and we see the Rabbeinu Bachai actually points out that the entire purpose of going into the desert was in order to have real life bitachon, emunah and bitachon. It was like a boot camp. It was like a bitachon boot camp. He says emunah is the theoretical level of belief. It's like you really, philosophizing about it, knowing the truth of it, even meditating about it, and really internalizing the truth of Hashem's ability and Hashem's omnipresence and omnipotence. But bitachon is when we're actually thrown into real life situations where we really need to throw ourselves onto Hashem and trust Him practically. And he says the Yam Suf was one example of that. And as the Midrash says, it wasn't just the fact that they trusted Hashem in the Yam Suf. He says because the Midrash says in Tehillim that you split the sea into smithereens, into tiny crumbs. What does that mean? The Midrash says that the sea didn't just split the entire length of the sea forward. It split every step of the way. Every step in front of them was the depth of the ocean. They had to take a step and it became it became dry land. Every step they took became dry land. So there's literally really an entire like life-changing stepping through emunah and bitachon. So that was a very powerful experience for them. And we know the man every day as well. They didn't have any savings. They couldn't even put away anything for the next day. They had to daily, literally just completely rely on Hashem, which really is the recipe of being a Jew on a deeper level, which is like the idea of prayer, that every day we believe that we have fresh shefa from Hashem. So that was actually the preparation of Torah. So we'll finish here for now, and we'll continue next time.